The fog rolled in thick from Casco Bay, swallowing the docks in a damp grey silence. The creak of old wood and the slap of waves against the harbour pilings were the only sounds that dared to exist before sunrise. Then came the shout, sharp, frightened, breaking through the stillness. "Over here!" Someone called the police. 2 fishermen stood by Pier 9, their flashlights trembling over a shape tangled in fishing nets. It was a man's body, face pale as the morning mist, 1 boot missing, a gold wedding band glinting under the weak light. Detective Ethan Walsh arrived minutes later, his breath forming ghosts in the cold October air. He had been with the Portland Police Department for just 3 weeks, still trying to learn the rhythm of this coastal town. Maine wasn't Boston, not by a long shot. Here, people kept to themselves, and secrets thrived like barnacles under the pier. The coroner knelt beside the body. Male, late 40s, been in the water less than 12 hours. Ethan squatted down, studying the man's weathered hands, the faint smell of diesel on his coat. "Any ID?" "Yeah," one officer said, lifting a soaked wallet. "Peter Collins. Lived 3 streets up from the harbour, local fisherman." The name rippled through the small crowd gathering behind the police tape. Whispers spread. Everyone knew Peter Collins, or thought they did. He owned one of the most reliable boats in the fleet, the Marigold, and was the kind of man folks nodded to in the diner without needing words. But something about the stillness of his face bothered Ethan. It wasn't just death, it was absence, a life snuffed out too quietly. He straightened, scanning the harbour. "Any sign of struggle?" "None," replied Officer Crane. "No weapon, no witnesses. Just found him like this when the tide pulled out." Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the first trace of daylight touched the waves. Then someone wanted him found. The older fisherman who discovered the body, Joe Harkins, shuffled forward. "Detective, Peter didn't have enemies." "Everyone liked him." Ethan nodded, though he knew better than to trust that kind of talk. In small towns, people liked the idea of peace, even when it meant ignoring the cracks beneath it. He turned back to the body. A piece of netting clung to Peter's sleeve, torn as if ripped in struggle. His instincts tightened. Something wasn't right. "Get this to the lab," he told Crane, "and keep it quiet. The fewer people know, the better." As the stretcher rolled away, Ethan stood by the edge of the dock, watching the grey waters churn. The case was only minutes old, but the air already felt heavy with unspoken truths. He pulled his coat tighter, eyes lingering on the empty spot where the Marigold should have been moored. "Where are you, Peter?" he murmured. "And what did you get yourself into?" The fog swallowed his voice whole, leaving only the sound of the tide and a story waiting to be told. "If you're drawn to mysteries that hide beneath calm waters, stay with me. This story has just begun." The news of Peter Collins's death spread through Portland faster than the tide could turn. By mid-morning, every diner booth, bait shop, and corner store buzzed with whispers. People spoke his name like they were afraid it might summon the same fate. Peter was a good man, they said, never caused trouble. Yet Ethan Walsh had learned long ago that good men often left complicated shadows. He stood in the local diner, Millie's place, flipping through his notepad as the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Millie herself, a stout woman with a sharp tongue, refilled his cup without asking. "Tragic, ain't it?" she said, lowering her voice. "Peter fished these waters for 20 years. Never missed a Sunday breakfast here." Ethan looked up. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "He was friendly but quiet, kept to himself mostly. But lately, he looked tired, like something was weighing him down." Ethan jotted that down. "Did he mention anything unusual? Trouble with someone?" Millie hesitated. "You might talk to Reed over at the docks. They had words last week, real loud too, but Reed's not the kind of man you want to cross." Outside, the wind carried the salty tang of the ocean as Ethan walked toward the harbour office. The gulls cried overhead, circling the boats, bobbing gently against the piers. Fishermen moved about with weary purpose, their faces hard, their eyes flicking toward the detective with quiet suspicion. Outsiders didn't ask questions here without stirring the mud. Ethan found Sam Reed, a broad-shouldered man with a grey beard, leaning against a piling, smoking. "You're the cop asking about Peter," Reed said before Ethan even spoke. "I am. I heard you two argued recently." Reed's jaw tightened. "Men argue all the time, Detective. Especially about money. Peter owed me a week's worth of dock fees." "That's all? Was that all it was?" Reed dropped the cigarette and ground it beneath his boot. "Look, I didn't kill him, if that's what you're thinking. He was a stubborn old fool, but he didn't deserve that." Ethan studied him carefully. "Where were you last night?" "Home. Ask my wife. She'll tell you." He could tell Reed was holding something back, but pressing too hard now would only make him retreat. He made a note to follow up later. As Ethan walked back toward his car, he caught sight of a small group of fishermen gathered near the Marigold, Peter's boat. They spoke in low tones, glancing his way before scattering like startled birds. The boat rocked gently in the water, ropes creaking. Ethan stepped closer, peering at the deck. A fishing knife lay near the cabin door, rusted and forgotten, but the blade looked freshly cleaned. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. Peter Collins might have been the man everyone loved, but someone among them had a reason to hate him enough to make sure he'd never sail again. And that reason was buried somewhere in this town, waiting to surface. The Collins house stood on a quiet street overlooking the harbor, its paint weathered by salt and time. A wooden lobster trap sat by the porch, half broken, as if left there years ago and forgotten. When Ethan Walsh knocked, the sound seemed to sink into the cold morning air. After a moment, the door opened. Martha Collins appeared, mid-40s, pale, wrapped in a heavy cardigan despite the mild temperature. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her expression wasn't grief. It was something tighter, controlled. "Mrs. Collins," Ethan said softly, "I'm sorry for your loss. I'd like to ask a few questions." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and damp wood. Family photos lined the walls, Peter holding a fish, Peter smiling beside his boat, Peter at a town fair. Each frame showed the same confident grin, yet none of them included Martha. She sat down at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly. "I've already told the other officer everything I know." "I understand," Ethan replied, taking out his notebook. "Sometimes it helps to talk things through again." She looked past him, toward the window where the sea shimmered in the distance. "Peter left early yesterday morning, said he was checking nets before the storm rolled in. He didn't come home." "Was that unusual?" "Not entirely. He loved the water. Sometimes he stayed out late if the catch was good." Ethan noticed the small tremor in her hand as she reached for her cup. "Did he seem worried lately? Angry, maybe?" Her gaze flicked toward the hallway, as if listening for someone else. "Peter was complicated. He worked hard, but he carried burdens, things he didn't talk about." "What kind of things?" She hesitated. "Business matters. The docks." "You should talk to Sam Reed. They'd been arguing again." "I already have," Ethan said quietly, "but I think there's more to it. Did Peter mention money? Debts?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Detective, I don't know what you're suggesting, but Peter was a good man. He provided for us." "I'm not questioning that," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But something happened to him, and I need to understand why." For a long moment she didn't speak. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock above the sink. Finally she whispered, "He was scared." Ethan's pen paused. "Scared of what?" "I don't know," she said, voice trembling. "But 2 nights ago someone came by. I heard voices outside, low, angry. Peter told me it was just fishermen arguing, but after that he couldn't sleep. He kept pacing, staring out at the harbor." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Did you see who it was?" She shook her head. "No, I stayed inside." He closed his notebook gently. "If you remember anything else, call me any time." As he stood to leave, Martha's voice stopped him. "Detective, please. Don't make the town hate him." Ethan met her eyes. "I'm just looking for the truth, Mrs. Collins. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky above the harbour turned slate grey, heavy with rain. Ethan knew the widow was hiding something, not out of guilt, but fear. And in Portland, fear had a way of drowning the truth before it reached the surface. By the next morning, Portland's harbour buzzed with gossip. The fog lifted, but something heavier settled over the town: suspicion. Fishermen worked in silence, their glances sharp, their voices hushed. Even the gulls seemed quieter, circling above as if listening. Detective Ethan Walsh moved through the docks, notebook tucked under his arm. Every step echoed against the wet planks. People greeted him with polite nods, then turned away, pretending to be busy. It was the kind of small-town quiet that screamed, "We know something, but we're not telling." He stopped by Tom Harkins, an older fisherman mending nets beside his boat. "Morning, Tom," Ethan said. "You were close to Peter Collins, right?" Tom didn't look up. "Everyone was close to Peter," he muttered. "That's just how it is here." "I'm hearing that he'd been having trouble lately," Ethan pressed. "Anything you can tell me about that?" Tom's weathered hands froze mid-knot. "Trouble's always been here, Detective. It just doesn't always wash up on shore." Ethan studied him. "Meaning?" Tom finally met his eyes. "Meaning you should let this one be. The harbour's got long memories and short tempers. Men who dig too deep usually end up buried in the tide. Is that a threat? A warning?" Tom's voice softened. "Peter wasn't the first to cross the wrong people. Won't be the last." Ethan thanked him and walked on, uneasy. The breeze carried the smell of salt and diesel, familiar yet oppressive. He passed by the Marigold, Peter's boat, still tethered to the dock like a ghost that refused to leave. A group of fishermen nearby stopped talking as soon as he approached. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "I'm still looking into what happened to Peter. Any of you see or hear anything unusual lately?" They exchanged glances. One man spat tobacco into the water. "We mind our own business here, Detective. You should do the same." "I can't," Ethan replied evenly. "Our man's dead." "Then let the sea keep him," another muttered before walking off. Their words chilled him more than the October wind. There was a rhythm to this silence, not fear of the killer, but of something bigger, something that owned this harbour more than any fisherman ever could. He turned toward the bait shop at the end of the pier. The door creaked as he stepped in. Inside, the radio played softly, old country music, and a man behind the counter glanced up. "Detective Walsh, right? You won't find many friends poking around here." "Seems that way," Ethan said. "You got a reason for that?" The man smirked. "Portland's built on the water, but it floats on secrets. You start pulling one loose, the rest come with it." Ethan left the shop with that phrase echoing in his mind. The wind had picked up, carrying a faint metallic tang, like the smell before a storm. He paused by the edge of the pier, watching the tide push against the pilings. The harbour wasn't just hiding a killer, it was protecting one. And someone out there wanted to make sure Ethan never found out why. By the third day, Ethan Walsh realized he wasn't just chasing a killer, he was fighting the town itself. Portland might have looked peaceful from the outside, with its postcard harbour and tidy streets, but underneath, it was stitched together by silence. Everyone owed someone something, and no one ever talked about it. At the police station, the mood was tense. Chief Harlan Briggs, a man built like a retired boxer, stood by the window with a cigarette smouldering between his fingers. "You've been stirring the pot, Walsh," he said without turning around. "I'm doing my job," Ethan replied. "Peter Collins didn't drown, he was dumped." Briggs exhaled smoke and shook his head. "And what makes you so sure?" "His injuries. The netting marks on his wrists, the torn sleeve, and he struggled. Someone wanted it to look clean." Briggs turned then, his expression unreadable. "You're new here, Detective. You don't know how this place works. People talk, and sometimes talk gets you hurt. Let this one rest." "The coroner's report says accidental death." "Did you read the same report I did?" Ethan shot back. Briggs crushed his cigarette in the ashtray. "You're not in Boston anymore. Around here, we take care of our own. Don't go looking for trouble." That phrase, "our own," stuck in Ethan's head long after he left the office. He spent the afternoon walking through town, feeling the weight of eyes following him. At the docks, men fell silent when he passed. At the diner, Millie's friendly tone turned cautious. Portland wasn't trying to hide its fear, it was enforcing it. He stopped at a small bar near the water, the Rusted Anchor. The bartender, Gabe, wiped down the counter, pretending not to notice him. "Whiskey," Ethan said. "On duty?" Gabe asked, smirking. "Off the record," Ethan replied. Gabe poured the drink. "You're digging into Collins, huh?" "Trying to understand why a whole town's afraid of a dead fisherman," Ethan said. Gabe leaned closer, voice dropping. "You ever heard the saying, the harbor pays its debts? Around here, favors run deep, and so do grudges." Peter forgot that. "What do you mean?" But Gabe straightened, his expression shutting down. "Forget I said anything." Ethan paid, left the glass half full, and stepped outside. The sky had darkened, and gulls screamed overhead, their cries sharp as warning bells. He looked toward the docks, the heart of everything, and realized the town wasn't just covering for someone. It was protecting itself, even if that meant protecting a murderer. Back at his car, Ethan sat for a moment, notebook open, the pages damp from the mist. He'd written 2 words without realizing it. They're lying. He closed the book, gripping it tight. Portland, Maine, had built its life on the water, on tides that erased footprints and washed away sins. But Ethan wasn't from here. And he wasn't about to let the sea decide what stayed buried. Something in this town stank worse than low tide, and he was going to find out exactly what it was. The storm rolled in before dawn, turning the harbor into a blur of grey rain and churning water. Ethan Walsh sat in his office, the window rattling in its frame, a stack of dead-end reports spread across his desk. The case was starting to feel like the town itself, cold, closed, and full of secrets that refused to surface. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. When the door opened, a boy no older than 17 stood there, soaked to the bone, clutching a cassette tape in one hand. "You're Detective Walsh, right?" the boy asked, voice shaking. "That's me," Ethan said, motioning him inside. "You're out early." The boy nodded nervously. "Name's Tommy. I work the docks sometimes for Reed and Sons." Ethan leaned forward. "You know something about Peter Collins?" Tommy hesitated, eyes darting toward the rain outside. "I shouldn't be here, but I heard something. That night." He held up the cassette. "I record sounds, waves, seagulls, engines, for fun. My dad used to do it. I left my recorder running near Pier 9 the night Peter died." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You listened to it?" "Yeah. There was yelling. 2 men. One sounded like Peter, the other—" Tommy swallowed hard. He said a name. "Reed." Ethan stared at him. "You're sure?" Tommy nodded. "I didn't know what to do. Everyone told me to keep quiet." "They said people who talk around here disappear." Ethan took the tape gently. "You did the right thing coming to me. No one's going to hurt you, all right?" Tommy managed a weak smile, but fear lingered in his eyes. "You don't know this town, Detective. They take care of their own." After the boy left, Ethan sat staring at the cassette for a long moment before sliding it into the old tape player on his desk. The tape hissed, then crackled to life. The faint hum of water, the clink of metal, distant voices carried by wind. Then came it, the argument. "You don't know what you're doing, Frank." Peter's voice, unmistakable. A pause. Then a lower, colder tone. "You should have kept your mouth shut." A scuffle, the sound of something striking wood, a splash, then silence, broken only by the relentless rhythm of the tide. Ethan rewound it twice, listening again, every word heavier than the last. Frank Reed, the name Martha had mentioned, the man who'd already lied to his face. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, but stopped midway. The chief's warning echoed in his head. Let it rest. No, not this time. Ethan pocketed the tape and stepped into the rain. The streets glistened under the storm, every shadow stretched long and uncertain. Somewhere out there a man thought he'd gotten away with murder. But now Ethan had proof, and for the first time since Peter Collins's body washed ashore, the tide was starting to turn. And someone, somewhere, was about to feel it crash. The rain had passed, but Portland's streets were still slick with puddles and secrets. Detective Ethan Walsh sat in his car outside the Reed & Sons logistics office, engine off, eyes fixed on the small brick building. The cassette tape rested in his coat pocket like a live grenade. He knew what he'd heard, Peter Collins's voice, then Frank Reed's. But knowing wasn't enough. He needed proof that would hold. Inside the office, the smell of old paper and salt water hung heavy in the air. A secretary behind the counter offered a tight smile. "Mister, Reed's not in today." "I'm not here for him," Ethan said, flashing his badge. "I just need to look at some records, fishing logs, transactions, routine review." Her eyes flickered with unease. "I don't think—" "Then I'll think for you," Ethan interrupted, voice calm but sharp. "Where do you keep your ledgers?" Moments later, he was alone in a small storage room filled with dust and the faint hum of a refrigerator. Shelves lined with binders stretched along the wall, years of shipments, payments, contracts. Ethan flipped through one after another until a single ledger caught his eye. Its pages smelled of salt and oil, the ink faded but legible. At first everything seemed normal. Delivery dates, amounts, fuel expenses. Then came a section marked only by initials, PC, appearing several times over the past months next to large sums of cash. Peter Collins. Ethan frowned, running a finger along the column. The payments didn't match any registered transaction. No signatures, no receipts, just the same looping initials and the occasional word doc. He kept turning pages until one line stopped him cold. Beside a payment entry, "Debt settled, 10/12, no further issue." The date matched the night Peter died. A door creaked behind him. "You find what you're looking for, Detective." Ethan turned slowly. Frank Reed stood there, raincoat half-buttoned, expression unreadable. "I was just reviewing some of your records," Ethan said evenly. "You keep detailed books." Reed chuckled, stepping closer. "Got to, in this business. Everything's got to add up. Fuel, bait, bodies." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Peter Collins's name shows up in your ledger. Care to explain?" Reed shrugged. "He owed me. Doc fees, equipment loans, you know how it goes. But that debt's cleared now." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I noticed." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Detective. You're digging where you shouldn't. Portland doesn't like outsiders messing with its balance." "I'm not from here," Ethan replied, stepping past him. "That's probably why I still give a damn." As he reached the door, Reed's voice followed him, low and deliberate. "You think you're chasing justice. What you're really chasing is your own end." Ethan didn't look back. The ledger was tucked under his arm, the tape still burning a hole in his pocket. Outside, the sky over the harbor had turned a bruised shade of blue, heavy with another storm. He had proof now. A name in ink, a date, a motive. But as he walked toward his car, one thought gnawed at him. In a town that hides its sins so well, truth might be the most dangerous catch of all. The ocean was calm that night, deceptively so. Detective Ethan Walsh sat alone in his apartment, the open ledger spread across his kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence. The words, "Debt settled," 10/12 stared back at him like a confession written in ink. He should have felt victory, proof of foul play, a lead that tied Reed directly to Peter's death. But instead he felt the familiar weight pressing against his chest, the same weight he thought he'd left behind in Boston. He poured a cup of coffee that had gone cold before it reached his lips. His mind drifted unbidden to the case that had driven him out of the city 2 years earlier. Another man, another lie, a witness who trusted him, and a mistake that cost her life. Her name was Lena, and her voice still echoed in his dreams. "You promised me you'd keep me safe, Detective," she'd said once, trembling in the hallway of that apartment building. He had promised, and then he'd arrived 10 minutes too late. He'd never forgiven himself for that. Maybe that was why he couldn't walk away from Peter Collins now, no matter how many doors slammed in his face. Maybe this wasn't just about justice. Maybe it was about redemption. The phone rang, jolting him back. He let it ring twice before answering. "Walsh." "Detective, it's Millie," said the voice on the other end. "You'd better come down to the diner. Someone's been asking questions about you." Ethan grabbed his coat and drove through the fog-thick streets. The diner's neon sign flickered in the mist like a dying heartbeat. Inside, Millie stood near the counter, her arms crossed. "He left just before you got here," she said quietly. "Big guy, beard, drove a blue pickup." "Reed," Ethan muttered. Millie nodded. "He said you're poking where you shouldn't. Told me to tell you that Portland doesn't forget." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Did he threaten you?" "No. But he didn't have to. The whole town's on edge. You should be careful." He looked at her, the worry etched deep on her face. "If I back off, he wins. That's not happening." As he left, the sound of the ocean carried across the harbor, a low, constant roar. It reminded him of Boston again, the night after Lena's funeral when he'd stood by the Charles River, wondering whether he still belonged behind a badge. The guilt hadn't gone away. It had only moved north with him. Now as he drove past the quiet houses, every shadow felt alive, every passing car too slow. He checked his rearview mirror twice, once out of habit, once out of instinct. Someone was following him. He didn't speed up. Instead, he drove toward the pier where the fog was thickest, his jaw tight. If the past was coming for him again, it would have to find him standing. And this time Ethan Walsh intended to finish what he'd started. The harbor at night was a different creature, silent, restless, and alive with the pulse of the tide. Ethan Walsh stood by the edge of Pier 9, his breath curling in the frigid air. Somewhere beyond the fog, a buoy bell rang in slow rhythm, like a warning no one wanted to hear. He was still thinking about the car that had tailed him earlier, the dark sedan that vanished once he reached the docks. Whoever was watching him didn't want to be seen, yet. He walked toward the small shack at the far end of the pier, the one belonging to Henry Pike, the night watchman. Henry had been guarding the harbor for 20 years, a man of few words and fewer friends. His flashlight beam cut through the mist as Ethan approached. "Evening, Henry," Ethan called. Henry squinted at him. "You don't sleep much, do you, detective?" "Not lately," Ethan said. "You were on duty the night Peter Collins died, right?" Henry nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, rough night." Tide was high, fog thick as soup. Didn't see much of anything. "But you heard something," Ethan pressed. Henry's jaw tightened. "Heard boats moving that shouldn't have been. Engines after hours. I thought maybe some of the boys were sneaking out to set extra traps. Didn't think much of it." Ethan leaned closer. "Did you recognize the boat?" There was a long pause. Henry finally sighed. "Could have been the Nor'easter. Belongs to Reed and Sons, but you didn't hear that from me. Was anyone with them?" "Hard to say. I saw shadows, 2, maybe 3 figures. They pulled out fast, no lights. Came back an hour later, lighter in the waterline, like they dropped something heavy." Ethan felt a chill crawl through him. "You didn't report it?" Henry's eyes met his. "And tell who? The sheriff?" "Reed? They'd have me out of a job before morning. You think I don't know how this town works?" Ethan stayed silent. Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm no hero. I got grandkids to feed, but I'll tell you this. Peter Collins was asking questions he shouldn't have, about shipments, paperwork that didn't match. Maybe he found something he wasn't supposed to." Ethan nodded. "He did. And it got him killed." Henry looked away toward the water, where faint ripples glimmered under the pier lights. "Then you'd better be careful too, detective. The sea's got room for one more secret." Ethan thanked him quietly and turned to leave. Behind him, the night swallowed Henry's silhouette, the flashlight beam fading like a dying star. As he walked back to his car, Ethan's mind raced. The tape, the ledger, and now this, everything pointed to Reed and Sons. But something else gnawed at him, a loose thread he couldn't yet pull. Who had brought Peter down there that night? The harbor wind howled through the rigging, and for the first time, Ethan felt the full weight of it. This town wasn't just hiding a killer. It was hiding the truth, and everyone was complicit in keeping it buried beneath the waves. The rain had returned by the time Ethan reached the Nor'easter, the boat Henry had mentioned. Its hull sat half submerged at the dock, the white paint peeling, revealing the dark wood beneath. The boat was anchored near Reed and Sons, just as the night watchman had said. Ethan stood there, watching the droplets slide down the side of the boat, his breath fogging up in the cold air. Something about the boat made him uneasy. the way it sat too still, the way it looked as though it was waiting. He stepped closer, his boots making soft thuds on the wet wood. The boat's deck was littered with fishing gear, ropes coiled, tackle boxes left open. But there was one thing that caught his eye, a fishing knife partially buried under a tarp. Ethan crouched, his fingers brushing the blade. It was covered in rust, but the edge was clean, as if it had been carefully wiped down recently. His mind raced back to the autopsy report. Peter's body had shown signs of a struggle before he was drowned. His hands were scraped, his nails broken. Had the struggle happened here? Had Peter been aboard this very boat? He stood up, wiping his hands on his coat. The dock was deserted, the lights flickering weakly in the distance. Reed & Sons was quiet, but Ethan could feel the eyes of the town on him. Everyone was waiting for him to make a mistake. Everyone was waiting for him to back down, but he wasn't backing down this time. The rain picked up, falling harder as if trying to wash away the secrets that had been buried here for years. Ethan glanced up toward the office at Reed & Sons. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. He turned toward his car, but before he could take a step, a shadow moved in the corner of his eye. Someone was standing near the edge of the dock, watching him. Ethan's pulse quickened. He couldn't make out the figure in the rain, but it was close. Too close. "Who's there?" Ethan called. There was no answer, only the sound of the waves crashing against the pier. He started walking toward the figure, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. The shadow didn't move. Ethan kept his steps slow, deliberate. He was close now. He could see the outline of the person, tall, broad-shouldered. As he reached the spot where the figure had been standing, it was gone. No one. Ethan stood still, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. He had the strange feeling that he was being led, that every step was a part of someone else's plan. He didn't dare stay any longer. Whatever was happening here was escalating, too fast for him to track. He needed to be smarter. He needed to be more careful. But as he left the dock and stepped back into the misty night, one question lingered in his mind. How far was Reed willing to go to keep the truth hidden? And how far would Ethan go to uncover it? The next morning, Ethan sat in his car outside the Portland Police Department, staring out the windshield at the grey skies hanging low over the city. The storm had passed, but the tension still hung thick in the air. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a text from Claire Donahue, the local journalist who had approached him a few days ago. She had offered her help, but Ethan hadn't taken her seriously at first. Journalists had their own agendas, and in a town like this, you didn't trust anyone who wasn't bound by the law. But now, after everything he'd uncovered, he needed someone who could dig where he couldn't. "Meet me at the diner. I have something you need to see." He read the message again. It was cryptic, but Claire hadn't been wrong so far. She'd already helped him track down some of the loose threads surrounding Peter Collins's death. Ethan knew he was running out of time. Reed & Sons was a stone wall, and every piece of evidence he had was being buried under layers of fear and silence. He pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the diner, a familiar place where the town's secrets were shared over coffee and bacon. When he walked in, the bell above the door rang, and Millie looked up from the counter. Her eyes flickered to the booth where Claire was sitting, then quickly back to the coffee pot she was refilling. Claire's head snapped up when she saw him. She was holding a manila folder, the corners creased from constant handling. Ethan slid into the seat across from her without saying a word. "I've been doing some digging," she started, her voice low, "and I found something you need to see." She opened the folder and slid a sheet of paper toward him. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer document. The numbers were printed clearly, the dates circled in red ink. The amount, $25,000, stood out like a scar. Ethan studied it. "What is this?" "Payment from Reed & Sons to an offshore account," Claire said, tapping the paper. "It's all linked back to Peter Collins, and the date. It's just a few days before he died." Ethan's mind raced. "Who's the account holder?" She hesitated, then flipped the page. "A shell company. It's registered under a false name, but I cross-referenced it with some court filings. It leads back to Frank Reed." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He paid Peter to keep quiet? Not exactly, Claire replied, her eyes narrowing. This payment was for something else, something bigger. I couldn't get the full details, but it's tied to illegal shipments moving through the harbor. Peter was the one tracking them. The pieces were starting to fit together. Peter had been digging into something that went far beyond debts and dock fees. He had uncovered something that threatened the very core of Reed & Sons. "Why did you help me?" Ethan asked, his voice low, his gaze locked on hers. Claire leaned back in her seat, her eyes intense. "Because I don't like what Reed is doing to this town. I've seen too many people afraid to speak out. Someone has to make sure the truth comes out." Ethan stared at the document again. The truth was slipping through his fingers, but at least now he had a name to hold on to. Frank Reed. "Do you have anything else?" he asked. Claire nodded. "A few more leads, but we'll need to move fast. Reed won't stop, and the deeper we dig, the more dangerous it gets." Ethan's eyes hardened. "I'm not backing down. Not now." As they gathered their things, the storm outside grew louder, rattling the diner windows. For the first time in days, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. With Claire's help, maybe they could tear down the wall that had kept Portland's darkest secrets hidden for so long. But even with an ally at his side, he knew one thing. The deeper he went, the more it would cost him. The night air felt different as Ethan Walsh stood by the waterfront, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. The storm had subsided, leaving behind an eerie stillness that seemed to settle over Portland. He knew Frank Reed had a reputation built on silence and fear. But tonight, Ethan was going to make sure that silence was shattered. It was late, and the lights in the harbor had dimmed, casting long shadows across the water. The docks were empty, save for the occasional creak of wood as the tide pushed against the pilings. Ethan's plan was simple. Get Reed to slip up, use the information Claire had given him, let Reed think he was in control, and then catch him. The phone in Ethan's pocket vibrated, a message from Claire. "It's set. He'll be at the pier in 30. Don't miss it." Ethan slipped the phone back into his coat and walked toward the far end of the docks, where Reed's office sat like a fortress in the night. The building was dark, but the faint glow of a single window told him someone was inside. He could hear footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around. He knew it was Tommy, the young fisherman who had given him the tape. Tommy had promised to help him, and tonight was no different. "You sure about this, Detective?" Tommy asked quietly as he caught up to him. "Reed's got a lot of eyes watching." Ethan glanced over at him, his face hardening. "I don't care how many eyes he has. If he thinks he's going to bury the truth, he's wrong." Tommy nodded, a nervous but determined look in his eyes. "Just say the word." "I'll keep my distance." Ethan stopped by the edge of the dock, looking out at the dark water. He felt the weight of the plan, the risk, pressing down on him. If he didn't get this right, the whole case would fall apart. But if he did, Portland's long-held secret would finally be dragged into the light. A car engine rumbled in the distance, cutting through the stillness. Ethan didn't flinch. This was it. The headlights of a black SUV appeared around the bend, slowly making its way down the pier. Ethan's breath caught. It was Reed. Ethan stepped into the shadows, his eyes narrowing as the SUV came to a stop. The door opened, and Frank Reed stepped out, his silhouette stark against the dim lights. Reed was taller than Ethan had imagined, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet menace that came from years of getting away with things. He adjusted his coat and looked around, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Ethan stayed still, watching. He had to be patient. One wrong move, and everything would slip through his fingers. Reed took a few steps toward the water, his back turned to Ethan. This was the moment. Ethan pulled out his phone, dialed Claire's number, and whispered into the receiver, "It's time." Seconds later, the trap was set. The sound of police sirens cut through the air, echoing across the docks. Reed spun around, his eyes wide with confusion and surprise. Ethan stepped out of the shadows, his voice calm but firm. "Frank Reed, you're under arrest for the murder of Peter Collins." Reed's face twisted into a snarl. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You're too late." But it wasn't too late. It was just the beginning. The rain fell in sheets as Ethan Walsh stood on the dock, watching Frank Reed's face twist in shock and defiance. The police sirens screamed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The trap had worked. Reed was cornered, but there was still that glint in his eyes, the defiant fire of a man who thought he could control everything. "You think you've won?" Reed spat again, taking a step back, his hands clenched into fists. "This isn't over." Ethan stepped closer, his own voice steady, almost detached. "You can't intimidate your way out of this, Reed. Peter Collins is dead and you're responsible." Reed's eyes flickered for just a moment, but the flicker was enough. Ethan saw it, the fear, the guilt, quickly masked by anger. "I didn't kill him," Reed growled, his voice lowering. "But I didn't stop it either." Ethan didn't flinch. He knew Reed was dangerous, but he also knew that the truth was beginning to break through the cracks. "Then why the payments? Why the offshore accounts?" Reed's jaw clenched. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You think a couple of payments make me a killer?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you, detective?" Ethan didn't need to answer. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and relentless, but it didn't matter. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Reed's mind, and the walls were crumbling. "The truth is," Reed continued, his voice more measured now, "Peter was too good. He saw things he wasn't supposed to see. He started asking the right questions, digging in places he shouldn't have. But that's where it gets tricky, detective. People like me, we don't just let things like that slide." He should have stayed quiet. A beat of silence passed between them, and then Reed's eyes hardened. "But that's where you're wrong, Walsh. I didn't kill him, but I sure as hell didn't stop it." The rain was deafening now, but Ethan wasn't listening to it anymore. His mind was racing. Who pulled the trigger, Reed? Who was the one who finished him off? Reed's lips twitched into a small, bitter smile. "You think you've figured it out, don't you?" He let out a long breath. "The truth, Peter got too close, too damn close, and when people like him start asking the right questions, well, the people who make the rules make sure they don't get to ask anymore." Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. Reed was close to breaking. He could feel it. "Who did it?" Ethan pressed again, his voice low and steady. Reed hesitated just for a moment, then his shoulders sagged as he spoke, almost too softly to hear. "It wasn't me, but I know who it was. It was Martha." The world stopped for a moment. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Martha Collins?" Reed's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Yeah, the good wife, the quiet one. You didn't think she was innocent, did you? She knew what Peter was digging into. She knew what was at stake." Ethan's mind was spinning, but the pieces were falling into place. Martha Collins had been hiding the truth the whole time. She had been part of the cover-up, part of the web of deceit. The sirens were almost upon them now, and Reed could see it. The game was over. "You should have stayed away from this, Walsh," Reed said, his voice now hollow. "But now you're in it too." Ethan stepped closer, his hand tightening around the grip of his gun. "Not anymore, Frank. This is over." The rain fell harder, but this time it felt like the storm was finally clearing. The truth had come to light, and now justice was going to follow. The cold wind from the harbor whipped around Ethan as he stood in the rain, still processing Reed's confession. Martha Collins. The words hung in the air like a ghost, hard to believe, but harder to ignore. The woman who had quietly mourned her husband's death had been involved in it all along. It wasn't just about Peter's investigation. It was about power, money, and the truth that had been buried beneath layers of lies. Ethan's mind was still racing when he turned away from Reed, signaling to the officers to take him into custody. The sound of Reed's protests faded behind him as he walked toward his car. He needed answers. He had one piece of the puzzle, but it was incomplete without understanding why Martha had been willing to cross that line. The car's engine hummed to life, and Ethan drove through the rain-slick streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. He wasn't just chasing a killer anymore. He was chasing a lie that had been allowed to fester for years. When he reached the Collins house, the lights were on, but the quiet inside was deafening. Ethan hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. The front door was ajar, a slight draft from the hallway making the air feel colder. He knocked softly, but there was no answer. He tried again, a little louder this time. "Martha," he called. "I need to talk to you." The door creaked open, and there she was, Martha Collins, standing in the doorway, her face pale, her expression guarded. "I know who killed Peter," Ethan said without preamble. Martha's eyes flickered for just a second before she masked her emotions, her face going blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't have to hide it anymore," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "It was Frank Reed, yes, but you knew, you helped him." For a long moment, Martha said nothing. Her eyes searched his, and for a split second, Ethan thought she might turn him away. But then she sighed and her shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had suddenly hit her all at once. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to be part of it." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Then tell me why." Martha looked out toward the harbor, her eyes distant, lost in memories. Peter wasn't just a fisherman. He was getting too close to something dangerous. Frank, he knew how to keep the money flowing. He didn't care who got in his way. But Peter was different. He wasn't afraid to ask questions, and when he started getting answers... She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I should have stopped him. I should have told him to walk away." Ethan took a deep breath. "But you didn't." "No," Martha replied softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't." She stepped back, inviting him inside. Ethan hesitated before following her into the dimly lit living room. The house felt empty now, every corner a reminder of the life that had been shattered. "I didn't want Peter dead," Martha continued, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But I couldn't live with the truth either. Frank was too powerful, too dangerous, and I was scared." Ethan nodded, understanding the pressure that had kept her silent for so long. But that fear had cost her everything. "You didn't kill him," Ethan said. "But you knew who did." Martha's lips trembled. "Yes, it was Frank's idea. I never thought it would go that far, but..." When Peter started getting too close to the truth, Frank took matters into his own hands. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I have to take him in, Martha." She nodded slowly, her face a mask of regret. "I know." As Ethan stepped back toward the door, the weight of the case felt heavier than ever. The truth had been hidden beneath layers of lies and fear, but now it was out in the open. The truth had a way of unraveling everything, even the things people were most afraid to face, and now, finally, justice would be served. The morning was dim, the sun barely a suggestion on the horizon as Ethan stood by the harbor, watching the waves roll in slowly. The air smelled of salt and fresh rain, but something felt different now, almost as if the storm had passed and a new calm had settled in. The truth had been dragged into the light, and with it came the weight of everything that had been hidden for so long. Behind him, the sound of footsteps made him turn. Claire Donahue was walking toward him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," she said quietly as she reached him, her voice softer than usual. "Reed's behind bars and the charges are sticking." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. He still felt the tension in his chest, the tension of chasing the truth and finally confronting it. There was a sense of closure, yes, but also the sharp edge of realization that in this line of work, closure never felt like victory. "How's Martha holding up?" Claire asked. Ethan glanced toward the Collins house, still silent and empty. "She's not the same woman we thought she was, but she's finally free of that fear. She did the right thing." Claire followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think she'll ever forgive herself?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice quiet. "I don't think she'll ever be able to fully forgive herself, but at least now she has a chance to live with it, to live without the weight of the secret." They stood there for a while, both of them lost in their thoughts. The harbor had calmed, but the world still felt heavy, as if the truth had left a mark that couldn't be erased. Ethan knew that no matter how many times he worked a case, no matter how many truths he uncovered, it never got easier. But there was something about this one, The way it had unfolded, the way it had come to a head, that felt different. "I heard the sheriff's office is already clearing up the paperwork," Claire said after a moment. "They're going to make it official today." Ethan sighed, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "And you'll be there, won't you? Reporting it all?" Claire gave a half-smile, her eyes glinting. "Someone has to make sure the truth gets out." "That's my job." "Maybe you'll even get the full story this time," Ethan teased. "I always do," Claire replied with a wink. The sound of a police siren echoed in the distance, breaking the silence. Ethan turned to see several officers making their way toward the station, their task now clear. Frank Reed would face the consequences for his role in Peter Collins's death, but it was more than just Reed's punishment. It was the unraveling of a lie that had kept the town in its grip for too long. As the officers drove past, Ethan took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "It's done." "Yeah," she agreed, looking out at the harbor. "But is it really ever done?" Ethan paused, watching the morning fog roll back over the water. The town would heal, but it would never be the same. He had done his job, but the scars of the past would remain, lingering in the shadows of the harbor. "It's done for now," he said finally. "But we'll see what comes next." Claire nodded, and for the first time in a long while Ethan felt a sense of peace. The truth had been found, and justice had been served, even if it had come too late for Peter Collins. At least now, the town had a chance to move on, and so did he.